understand that, and I agree with you. But asymmetric warfare that describes conditions of a conflict. It doesn't justify outcomes. International law still applies in both states, including distinction and proportionality. You cannot use asymmetric to automatically validate civilian casualties. It's impossible.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about. There's two kinds of warfare.
We're talking about Syria and border wars. It doesn't justify what Israel is doing in Palestine or in Lebanon.
Hang on. All right, I didn't interrupt you. I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying, so I'm going to re-clarify.
I understand. Go ahead.
There's two kinds of warfare. There's asymmetrical, which means one side has much more power than the other. That means it's asymmetrical. And then there's peer-to-peer warfare, which is symmetrical, which means that they're reasonably close in power. Okay? The problem with asymmetrical warfare is that it is fought in a certain way. Asymmetrical warfare, the powerful side, is generally going to use its military. The weaker side is generally going to use guerrilla warfare. Okay? Otherwise, if they tried to fight in the open, they would just get slaughtered within the first 15 minutes. I mean, that's the common sense, right? That's why Hamas hides among civilians, because they know if they were to run out into the open, they'll just get slaughtered in minutes. Okay? That doesn't justify why Hamas does what it does. It's just that's the logical reason why they do it. Now, the reason the casualty count is as low as it is, because that's incredibly low, 71,000 in 3 years, with I think it was about 30,000 of those being actual members of Hamas that Hamas has actually acknowledged, okay? Which means that there's about 40,000 civilians that have been unalived. That's almost a 1-to-1 combatant ratio, which means it's incredibly low, which means that all of these claims that Israel is being crazy about it are false. That's why it's important for people to understand that this is actually been a conflict where civilian casualties have been avoided. Because if they hadn't been avoided, the casualty counts would be exponentially higher.
Okay.
If the Israelis' goal was to unalive civilians, there would be no civilians left in Gaza.
Okay, so first thing I want to say one thing. Actually, I'm going to respond exactly to what you said. So I understand asymmetrical warfare, but if you equate that to like, I don't know, permission structure. Yes, asymmetrical warfare does mean one side of the military is stronger, but that concept does not remove legal obligations, and either side automatically justify civilian harm. And the last thing I'd like to say is, you're describing military imbalance. It doesn't justify civilian casualties or removing legal obligations. Claims that Hamas fighter ratio or 1-to-1 is not independently verified. You can show me no independent verification that Hamas, the people that are unalived, no, you can't. That half of the people in Palestine that have been unalived are Hamas. No, you can't. And you know what? No, you can't. But I'll wait.
I'll give you the source right now if you like.
Okay, I'll wait for your source that says half of the people in Palestine that have been unalived are absolutely Hamas. Also, international law still requires distinction and minimization of harm of civilians or harm to civilians. There is no rule that there's no rule that higher civilian deaths become accepted because one side is weaker or stronger. And the last thing.
Whoa. Okay, so here's what we're going to do.
Show me the 40,000 Hamas, yes.
Yeah,
thank you.
First, that's the simplest one, okay? There's actually a think tank that went through...
For your source, if you don't mind, Ryan.
Sure, okay. So there's a think tank in the I think it's the United States, the Henry Jackson Society. What they did was they took all of the casualties. They went through the casualty lists one by one, okay? Now, what they did was they figured out, and by the way, this is how they exposed that there were a lot of anomalies. They went one by one. They went with each person's name. They investigated the situation. They investigated how they were unalived. Okay? Oh, yeah, sorry, the UK, not the United States.
Tank estimate is not a universally verified source.
It's not an estimate. What they did was they took the actual Hamas statistics, okay? Then they went on the Hamas social media. They found all of the names, because I don't know if you know this, but every time a Hamasnik gets killed, Hamas releases their name. They usually show a picture of them in their Hamas gear, and they tell everybody this was a shaheed that was with us, blah blah blah. So they do know those numbers pretty, like, that's pretty accurate because they're using the Hamas sources for who Hamas was that got killed. Okay. The second thing, and I think this is kind of where there's a disconnect here. There are rules of war. And unfortunately, what a lot of people don't understand is that those rules of war specifically relate to civilian casualties. All right. There is a war crime called perfidy. Perfidy is when you dress up like a civilian, you do military acts, and then cause civilians to get killed. Right? Because what happens is if you pretend to be a civilian and you perform military acts, you're removing the protection of civilians.
Ryan, what if I could show you videos of ambulances in hospitals, ambulances that there are videos, there's a camera in there, and you have three.
This is the second part, and
they're not dressed up like Hamas.
That's not the point. I think you're missing the point.
No,
the second part, and this is important, is according to the rules of war, civilian things have what is called protected status. Certain civilian things. So hospitals have a protected status. Now, the problem is that they can lose the protected status under the rules of war. The second that it's used for military purposes or to gain a military advantage, they lose protected status. They do not regain protected status. Once protected status is lost, it's lost for the duration of the conflict. That's how that works with international law. Now, the problem that we have is that Hamas literally used all of these civilian infrastructures for military purposes. And it was very obvious that they were doing it. And they bragged about it on national TV on many occasions. So they lose those protected statuses. Now, why is that such a horrible war crime? Because that will directly lead to the unaliving of civilians, right? The loss of protected status of a hospital is an absolute war crime. So when you launch a rocket from a courtyard in a hospital, or you put bunkers in the basement of a hospital, or if you are seen gathering Hamas terrorists in one place in a hospital, it loses protected status.
I agree. That's true. International law does allow a hospital to lose protective status if it's used for military purposes, but that does not turn it into an unrestricted target. The attacking side still has to prove military necessity. They take precautions to minimize civilian harm, and that is not happening. And claims that all hospitals have lost protective status.
And they literally warned. Okay, hang on, Rosa. Do we agree that Israel has dropped pamphlets, that Israel has made phone calls to these places and literally said, evacuate, we are going to attack you within an hour?
I pivoted for a second, and I apologize. I want to go back to the one thing that you said. You treating a think tank, an analyst or a think tank interpretation as verified fact, that doesn't work, because combatant status can't be confirmed by a name or a list or public data. There's no independent consensus, and I don't have to look this up, but I'm going to stand 10 toes down, that confirms 40,000 Hamas fighters were killed. Prove that.
If Hamas themselves, right? Hamas, by the way, Hamas never admits Neither does Israel.
Neither does Israel. Fair enough.
Israel absolutely does. Israel comes right out and says how many.
No, they don't. No, yes, they don't.
They literally, Rosa, they literally publicize it in Israeli media. As soon as the families are informed, they name every single person that's unalived. They tell their unit, and they even usually say how they were unalived. That's something that I know because when I was in Israel, I saw it firsthand. Okay? Hamas never acknowledges that they had military casualties. What they do is they have on their social media, they will post a picture of the Hamasnik. They will post him holding his gun or whatever, dressed up like a Hamas guy, and they'll say, so-and-so was shahided today, blah, blah, blah. But they never come right out and say, clearly this guy's obviously Hamas, even though he's wearing a Hamas uniform. So on that, I would acknowledge that, okay, you may have somewhat of a point, but the reality is that when they posted on Hamas social media that our guy was shahided, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and take Hamas at their word that that guy was a member of Hamas.
Okay.
I have to because there's nobody else there to listen to.
All right. So I would like to ask you a question then. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu for war crimes and crimes against humanity. These are charges, not convictions, obviously. Separately, the ICJ is hearing a genocide case brought up by South Africa. It's not a rule or it's not a guilt. I understand, but these are allegations. If the ICC arrest warrants an ongoing ICJ a genocide case, why is that happening? Why is that happening? If what you're saying is true, then why are all of these independent organizations calling it genocide? And the last thing that I would like to just, and I don't want to pivot, but I just want to ask you one other question. In the 23% of occupied South Lebanon, the casualties, and I believe this was from maybe not the Israeli Times.
Let's get into the Lebanon stuff after, because the ICJ and ICC stuff is really, it's going to go in depth here.
Okay.
Right? We'll get into the Lebanon stuff after. My best friend is actually a Maronite from Lebanon, so that's of personal interest to me.
Anecdotal, but I respect your friend. Go ahead.
I'm saying, like, that's why it's important to me. So we will talk about that, but let's talk about the ICJ and the ICC first. Okay? The interesting thing about this whole, like the South Africa, first off, it's interesting that it's South Africa bringing forth the case, right? Why is it interesting? Because it was paid for by Iran. That's actually factual. We have the evidence for that. The other thing that I find really interesting about it is that the ICJ, the president of the ICJ, was just on Mehdi Hassan's stuff. I don't know if you follow Mehdi Hassan. Mehdi Hassan interviewed.
Mehdi Hassan, I think he's incredible. He's one of my favorite people on TikTok. Yes.
Was incredibly stupid. He
Ryan,
Kareem Khan. He brought Kareem Khan on.
I got $25,000 that said he destroys you in a debate, but we can talk about that later.
If you could set that up, I would have 100.
I mean, he's fucking amazing. I would like you to show me a video of him losing a debate, actually. That would be incredible.
I've never seen him win one. So here's the interesting thing
well,
about
now we're just delusional, okay.
He brings Kareem Khan. Do you know who Kareem Khan is?
I have no idea who Kareem Khan is, and I don't care.
He's the well, I think you should, because he's the head of the ICJ.
I don't care. I'll tell you why I don't care. Because you're
talking about the ICJ. Like
I did bring up the ICJ. I did bring up the ICJ, but there's also 14 other ones. But God, let's talk about the ICJ.
Well, we'll go with that one because that's the one that has the most credibility internationally. And interestingly enough, when Mehdi Hassan brought Kareem Khan onto his show, he consistently tried to get him to say that Israel's conducting a genocide. He tried very, very hard, right? What did Kareem Khan say to Mehdi? He said, the ICJ is a court. We are evidence-based. There is not enough evidence that Israel's conducting a genocide for us to say that it's a genocide. And then Mehdi Hassan got upset and said, well, what about this, 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 and this? And he started just like firing shit at Kareem Khan.
Okay.
And Kareem Khan's exact words, and this is important because this is the fucking head of the court.
Okay.
Right? This is the guy that has to make the decision. He says, you guys keep trying to force us to take this to court before we have enough evidence. We will lose because there is no evidence. He's like, you have to wait until we can gather enough evidence to actually, have the court case.
Okay.
But Mehdi didn't want to hear that because in Mehdi's mind, it's like, no, it's a genocide because we said it's a genocide.
Sure.
The reality is the court itself, the head of the court said, not enough proof. There's no evidence. So, sorry. So that's to deal with the ICJ.
Right, well, let's talk about the ICC or the United Nations Commission, the International Human Rights Organization, Amnesty International.
Hang on. Stop. We're going to go one at a time.
Perfect.
All right. Now we'll go with the ICC. The ICC doesn't have the same level of evidentiary procedure. It doesn't matter to the ICC. Like you said, it's just an accusation at this point. So when they put out a warrant, what they're trying to do is they're trying to virtue signal. There isn't a case yet. There is no case for war crimes against Bibi Netanyahu. However, because they were demanding that he comes and testifies, they virtue signal by saying to everybody, we're putting out a warrant for Bibi Netanyahu, because that implies that he's guilty before it even starts. So we don't take the ICC very seriously, because the ICC, unfortunately, hasn't been a very serious body in a long time. Now, the next thing, if you want to go with these international human rights organizations, I'm gonna get ahead of you on this. there's three organizations that most pro-pallies love to talk about. They love to talk about Amnesty International. They love to talk about Human Rights Watch. And then they'll bring up the so-called Israeli one, which is B'Tselem. Now, the interesting part is that all three of those operate in a circle jerk.
One by one, I don't want to get, so let's just talk about the ICC. So the ICC is a legitimate international court. They're established under, I think, the Rome Statute, and they're used globally to investigate war crimes. We'll say war crimes because there's a lot of allegations and there's a lot of back and forth with them, with the Israeli government, Bibi Netanyahu, specifically the IDF. It hasn't convicted Netanyahu. I understand that, but it sought warrants for his arrest based on war crimes and crimes against humanity. You can disagree with the allegations, but you can't say that the ICC has no validity. And I would argue that if Bibi Netanyahu is innocent, why wouldn't he just testify?
So I'm going to ask you a question. If you were...
Not a question with a question.
No, absolutely. There has to be a question with a question. And the reason is, it's really simple. If we were to decide, like, okay, I'm going to make an accusation against you. Okay? Now, I'm going to imply that you've done something horrific. But then I'm going to say, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to come to me and tell me why I'm wrong. Right? Would you actually trust me when I've already basically told you flat out that, you know, it's going to be a kangaroo court? Like, I've already implied that you're guilty. By the way, you can have a request or you can have a warrant. The ICC has many different ways that they can actually compel somebody to testify.
Correct.
Right? But issuing a warrant insinuates that somebody is guilty before they even get there. We need you to come and testify. But
Ryan, with all due Ryan, isn't that how it works? Aren't you innocent until no?
Yeah,
no?
Exactly. Thank you. Innocent until proven guilty. But
correct.
When you issue a warrant for someone's arrest to compel their testimony,
the ICC don't work with personal accusations without evidence. The International Criminal Court doesn't say, "Hey, Bibi, we think you did something wrong."
Okay, hang on. Did you just say that these you just said these international courts don't operate without evidence, but yet the ICJ, the Karim Khan, who's the head of the ICJ.
I'm not going back to the ICJ. I'm talking about the ICC.
The ICJ and the ICC are very intertwined.
But they're not the same. They're not the same, and you know they're not the same.
They aren't exactly. They aren't the exact same body. But
defendants aren't required to testify to prevent charges. In fact, the international law explicitly protects the right not to self-incriminate. So it's not a conversation where you're obligated. No, you're not. It's not a conversation where you're obligated to persuade the court before evidence exists. It's a fucking legal process where both sides argue before a court. That's how the justice system works. They don't knock on Bibi's door and say, "We think you fucking unalived a bunch of innocent people." They bring charges. They issue warrants. They tell you to come and testify. And Bibi won't testify because he's fucking guilty.
There's no charges.
I'm sorry, what?
Are you saying that the ICC is charging Bibi with genocide? I've never seen any evidence.
I didn't say they charged him. I didn't say they charged him with genocide. I said that they sought out arrest warrants. They're not convictions. They're arrest warrants for him and I believe the defense minister on war crimes and crimes against humanity. These are not warrant applications issued by the ICC. They are reviewed by judges. They're not rulings of guilt. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that, yes, the ICC has officially requested warrants through the legal process. I'm saying that the ICC has formally sought those arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu and the defense minister, I don't know his name, for crimes against
testimony. They weren't okay.
I didn't say that they were based on testimony. I said that
that's not what I said either.
And they're not convictions either.
Rosa, stop for a second, okay? You got to listen to what I'm saying, and then I'll listen to
what you said.
No,
you asked me. You asked me
because I said the warrants were to compel testimony. Like, that's what I said. I didn't say anything about anything else. Like, I understand. Like, you're frustrated. I would be frustrated too. This is a frustrating thing to even talk about because it's stupid. The reality is there is no evidence that Bibi Netanyahu is complicit in any war crimes. There is no evidence that Israel conducted a genocide. Why? Because there were no war crimes and there were no genocides. So you could argue that some civilians were killed. And then you could argue that individual Israelis may have been complicit in what are legally considered war crimes.
Right, but the ICC,
also,
they don't issue warrants without evidentially reviewed. They have evidence. A warrant request is based on a prosecutor's evidence that they file with a judge who evaluates it for reasonable grounds, not speculation.
okay,
Right? Or wrong?
that's what it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, we've already we've already seen on several
Yeah.
occasions the
Ray Van Winkle himself was persecuted in Manhattan. I know. I've heard this argument before. I understand. All I'm going to say is the ICC is the International Criminal Court. They apply for a warrant. They applied for them for Benjamin Netanyahu and the minister. They are alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. And in fact, the ICC prosecutor's applications itself is based on collected evidence and legal analysis. Without it, it ultimately leads to conviction in a separate form, whether evidence exists. Evidence must exist in a prosecution's file. Guilt is not determined until you have a trial, right? It's just a warrant for your arrest. You have the right to defend yourself, to show your evidence and defense of yourself, and the ICC has to prove their case by a preponderance of evidence because they are the prosecutor. So my argument would be if Bibi Netanyahu is the 13th disciple or the one that's directly, God's left wing and he's God's chosen person, why doesn't he just show up and testify?
What are the charges? Because there are no charges.
War crime. No.
Show me the source right now where the charge is that Bibi Netanyahu is complicit with war crimes. I want you to show me exactly
what do you think the warrants, I'm sorry. So what do you think?
You don't need charges to have a warrant. I just told you, warrants can be given to compel testimony. So I'm just curious, what are the exact charges?
War crimes and crimes against humanity.
Okay. And who's charging him?
Criminal.
With war crimes.